I want to tell you about a morning that I think about often. It was about 2 years ago, and I was finishing a long clinic day when my last patient of the afternoon walked in. Her name is Dorothy. Dorothy is 76 years old, and she is not the kind of person who wastes time. She sat down in my office, and she put both hands flat on the table in front of her, and she said, "Dr. Chen, I have high blood pressure. My cholesterol is managed, but not perfect. My mother died of a heart attack at 71. My sister had a stent put in at 68. I am 76 years old, and I have been told by 4 different doctors over the past 15 years to eat healthy, but not one of them has ever sat down and told me specifically which 5 foods, if I ate them every single day, would give my heart the best protection I can give it at my age. Now, not in general, not eventually, now. I want to know exactly what to eat and why it helps. And I want you to tell me today." I looked at Dorothy and I thought, this woman has just asked me the most important question in cardiovascular nutrition in a way that no medical school ever taught me how to answer, specifically, clearly, with evidence and with respect, for the fact that she already knows what the general advice is and is asking me to do better than that. And I said, "Dorothy, pull your chair a little closer because this is going to take a few minutes to do properly, and you deserve a proper answer." I am Dr. Daniel Chen, and what I told Dorothy that afternoon is what I want to tell you today. Not a general list of heart-healthy foods, but 5 specific foods with specific mechanisms and specific evidence behind each one that together address the most important and most preventable processes that damage the heart and the arteries after 70. So let me start where I started, with Dorothy, with why the heart, after 70, needs specific protection that goes beyond what it needed at 50, because the context is what makes the choices make sense. After 70, the arterial environment has changed in several ways that increase the vulnerability of the cardiovascular system to ongoing damage and the need for active daily protection, more than at any earlier point in life. Arterial stiffness has increased significantly, making it harder for the heart to pump blood effectively through stiffer, less compliant arteries and raising systolic blood pressure. In most adults over 70, even those with well-managed hypertension, oxidative stress, the production of reactive oxygen species that damage blood vessel walls and oxidize LDL cholesterol into the form that initiates plaque formation, is higher than at any earlier point in life, because the body's antioxidant defenses are weaker and cellular damage has accumulated over decades. Chronic low-grade inflammation, inflammaging, as I have described in previous videos, is more active, driving the inflammatory processes that destabilize existing plaques and promote new ones. And endothelial function, the ability of the arterial lining to produce nitric oxide, regulate blood pressure, and prevent platelet adhesion, is reduced compared to earlier decades. Together, these 4 changes create an arterial environment that is significantly more vulnerable to the ongoing processes of atherosclerosis and cardiovascular disease than it was even 20 years earlier. And the 5 foods I want to tell you about address these 4 mechanisms directly, simultaneously, and with genuine clinical evidence behind each one. The first food is oily fish, specifically wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, and herring, eaten at least twice per week. I have discussed oily fish in several previous videos, but I want to be specific here about exactly why. In the context of the aging cardiovascular system after 70. The long-chain omega-3 fatty acids, EPA and DHA, found in oily fish address all 4 of the vulnerability mechanisms I just described simultaneously and in ways that no other single food matches for arterial stiffness. Research has specifically shown that regular fish oil consumption reduces pulse wave velocity, the clinical measure of arterial stiffness that I described in my video on the 82-year-old patient with exceptional arterial health. In adults over 65, arterial compliance improves with regular omega-3 consumption in a measurable and meaningful way. For oxidative stress, EPA and DHA reduce the production of reactive oxygen species in vascular tissue, and specifically reduce the oxidizability of LDL, the tendency of LDL cholesterol to be damaged by oxidative processes into the form that initiates plaque. For inflammation, omega-3 fatty acids are the direct precursors of a class of signaling molecules called resolvins and protectins that are the body's own anti-inflammatory and pro-resolution molecules that actively switch off inflammatory processes in vascular tissue. This is not simply reducing inflammation, this is actively resolving it, a mechanistic distinction that makes omega-3s uniquely valuable among anti-inflammatory dietary components. And for endothelial function, EPA specifically has been shown to improve nitric oxide production in endothelial cells and to reduce the expression of adhesion molecules on the endothelial surface that monocytes, the cells responsible for foam cell formation, use to attach to the arterial wall and begin plaque development. 2 servings per week of wild salmon or sardines provides enough EPA and DHA to produce meaningful effects on all 4 of these mechanisms. In most adults over 70, Dorothy told me, she had been eating sardines once a week since her daughter had told her they were good for her. I told her, make it 3 times a week, and not always sardines. Alternate with salmon or mackerel or herring, each of which has a slightly different nutritional profile that complements the others. Dorothy nodded and wrote it down in the small notebook she had brought with her to the appointment. The second food is walnuts, a small handful of approximately 28 grams every single day. I want to explain why walnuts specifically, rather than almonds or cashews or the generic advice to eat nuts, because the reason is specific and matters. Walnuts are the only nut that is rich in alpha-linolenic acid, ALA, the plant-based omega-3 fatty acid that, while it does not convert to EPA and DHA in the body as efficiently as marine omega-3s, provides its own cardiovascular protective properties through several independent mechanisms, including reducing arterial inflammation and supporting endothelial function. But more importantly, in the specific context of heart protection after 70, walnuts contain allantotanins, a class of polyphenols that are converted by gut bacteria into compounds called urolithins that have been shown in research to have potent anti-inflammatory effects in arterial tissue, and specifically to reduce the expression of adhesion molecules on the endothelial surface, the same molecules that omega-3s reduce and that monocytes use to initiate plaque formation. The WAHA trial, a large 2-year randomized controlled study that I described in my video on the patient with remarkable heart health, specifically examined walnuts in older adults and found that daily walnut consumption reduced LDL cholesterol, reduced small dense LDL particles, the most atherogenic form, reduced inflammatory markers, including interleukin-6, and reduced blood pressure compared to a control group in adults whose average age was 69 years old. 1 handful per day is what the WAHA trial used. 1 handful per day is what I recommended to Dorothy. She told me she had been avoiding nuts because she thought they were fattening. I told her the research on walnuts in adults over 65 does not support that concern. The specific fats in walnuts have a metabolic effect that is different from the effect of equivalent calories from refined carbohydrates. And the cardiovascular benefit of 1 handful per day is well established in clinical evidence. At that quantity, Dorothy wrote it down. The third food is extra virgin olive oil, which I have discussed in detail in multiple previous videos, but which belongs on this list because no other commonly available dietary fat has the same strength and breadth of cardiovascular evidence behind it. And because after 70, when oxidative stress and arterial inflammation are at their highest, the polyphenol content of extra virgin olive oil is most needed. I want to add one specific piece of evidence to what I have said in previous videos, because it is directly relevant to the question Dorothy asked about what to eat now at her age. Specifically, the Predimed Plus trial, which extended the original Predimed study and which specifically examined the cardiovascular effects of an intensive Mediterranean diet, including extra virgin olive oil, in adults with metabolic syndrome whose average age was over 65, found that the Mediterranean diet with extra virgin olive oil reduced major cardiovascular events by approximately 24% compared to a low-fat control diet. Over 5 years in adults, already in the age group where Dorothy was asking her question. Not in young, healthy adults, in adults her age, with the risk factors she had. 4 tablespoons per day as a cooking fat, dressing, and finishing oil is the dose used in the research that shows these effects, and is what I recommended to Dorothy. The 4th food is dark leafy greens every single day in some form: spinach, kale, rocket, Swiss chard, watercress. And I want to explain why this food group, in the context of heart protection after 70, deserves a specific mechanism explanation rather than the general eat more vegetables advice that most older adults have heard so many times, that it has lost all meaning. Dark leafy greens have 3 specific mechanisms that make them particularly valuable for heart protection in the aging cardiovascular system. The first is their dietary nitrate content, as I described in detail in my video on nitric oxide, and blood flow. Dark leafy greens are among the richest dietary sources of nitrate that is converted through the oral bacterial pathway I described into nitric oxide in the body, directly supporting endothelial function and arterial vasodilation in a way that bypasses the age-impaired eNOS pathway and supplements the body's declining nitric oxide production from within. The second is their vitamin K1 content. Vitamin K1, as I described in my video on vitamin D and K2, is converted in the body to a range of K vitamins, including some with vitamin K2-like properties that support the routing of calcium to bones rather than arteries, reducing the arterial calcification that contributes to arterial stiffness and cardiovascular risk in older adults. The third is their folate content, which supports homocysteine metabolism and the endothelial function that elevated homocysteine impairs. Dorothy had been eating salad 2 or 3 times a week with iceberg lettuce, which has minimal nitrate, folate, or vitamin K content, compared to dark leafy greens. I told her, replace the iceberg with spinach or rocket every single day. Not 3 times a week, every day. Because the cumulative effect of daily nitrate exposure on endothelial function requires consistency to produce the improvements in blood vessel relaxation and dilation that the research on dietary nitrate has documented. She wrote it down. The fifth food is dark chocolate with a cocoa content of 70% or above. Specifically, a small amount of approximately 20 to 30 grams every day. I have mentioned dark chocolate in previous videos, including in my video on Edward, the 82-year-old patient with the extraordinary calcium score, who had eaten a small square of dark chocolate every evening for 27 years. But I want to explain the specific cardiovascular mechanism in more detail here. Because Dorothy's response when I mentioned dark chocolate was the same response I get from almost every patient when I include it on a list of heart protective foods. She looked at me and said, "Are you serious?" And I said, "Very." And I want to tell you exactly why. The flavonols in dark chocolate, specifically a class called procyanidins and epicatechin, have been shown in multiple clinical trials to improve flow-mediated dilation by an average of approximately 1.5 to 2%, a clinically meaningful improvement in endothelial function that is comparable to the effect of some antihypertensive medications at the doses studied through mechanisms that include increased eNOS activation and increased nitric oxide production in the endothelium to reduce LDL oxidation to their antioxidant and radical scavenging properties, to reduce platelet aggregation to their effects on platelet activation pathways, and to reduce blood pressure through the combined vasodilating effects of improved nitric oxide signaling. The Cocoa Supplement and Multivitamin Outcomes Study, published in the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition, found that cocoa flavanol supplementation over 2 years significantly reduced cardiovascular mortality in older adults compared to placebo. And a meta-analysis of 23 studies examining dark chocolate and cardiovascular risk markers found significant reductions in blood pressure, LDL cholesterol, and inflammatory markers across the studies reviewed. 20 to 30 grams per day of 70% or higher cocoa, dark chocolate, is the dose range used in most of the positive trials and is what I recommended to Dorothy as an evening ritual, specifically because making it a pleasurable, predictable daily habit is what produces the consistency that translates into the cardiovascular benefit that the research has documented. Dorothy looked at me when I finished, going through the 5 foods and the evidence behind each one. And she looked at her notebook, where she had written every detail of every mechanism that I had described. And she said, "This is what I have been asking for 15 years, and nobody has given it to me until today." And then she said something that I have thought about many times since that afternoon. She said, "I am 76 years old. I do not have 15 more years to wait for this kind of information, and neither does anyone. Watching this video, let me bring everything together. 5 foods that every senior should eat for heart protection after 70. Oily fish, eaten at least twice per week. Wild salmon, sardines, mackerel, herring, for EPA and DHA that reduce arterial stiffness, oxidative stress, inflammation, and restore endothelial function through mechanisms that operate on all 4 of the cardiovascular vulnerability processes of the aging arterial system simultaneously. Walnuts, 1 handful per day for alpha-linolenic acid, alagitanin-derived urolithins, and the specific LDL reducing. inflammation reducing, blood pressure lowering effects that the WAHA trial documented in adults at exactly Dorothy's age. Extra virgin olive oil, 4 tablespoons per day, for hydroxytyrosol, oleocanthal, and the polyphenol-driven protection of the arterial lining that the Predimed trial showed reduces major cardiovascular events by approximately 24% in adults over 65 with cardiovascular risk factors. Dark leafy greens every single day for dietary nitrate that bypasses the age-impaired nitric oxide pathway. Vitamin K1 that supports calcium routing away from arteries, and folate that supports endothelial function through homocysteine metabolism, and dark chocolate, 70% cocoa or above, 20 to 30 grams every day, for flavonols that improve flow-mediated dilation, reduce LDL oxidation, reduce platelet aggregation, and reduce blood pressure in ways documented in multiple randomized controlled trials in older adults. Dorothy asked me the right question. 15 years, too late, to get the answer she deserved, but not too late to act on it. She is 76, and she started the week after that appointment, and she has not stopped every single day since. Because as she told me at her last appointment, when you finally understand exactly what the food is doing for your heart every day, you never want to stop. I am Dr. Daniel Chen. If this video finally gave you the specific answer to the specific question that Dorothy asked, please share it with every senior you know who has also been told to eat healthy, without ever being told specifically what that means for a heart that is 70 years old and deserves the most targeted protection available. Subscribe to this channel for weekly videos made with genuine care for older adults who deserve real information about their own health. And leave me a comment below. Tell me which of these 5 foods you are already eating every day and which one you are going to add starting tomorrow. I read every single comment and I genuinely look forward to hearing from you. Take care of your heart. Dorothy is every single day, and so should you be.